Cosmic Familia, welcome back to Psychedelicizationism. I hope everyone is doing well in good spirit. In this video, we're going to talk about the atom as a magneto-dielectric dynamo that is consisting of toroidal geometry, hyperbolic structure, and ethereal flow. Now, there exists a coherent flat earth model that connects the heavenly cosmos with the nature of reality as well as with the human anatomy. Originally articulated by the Egyptians as a tomb, but expressed atomically from Ken Wheeler as a fourfold quadrupolar magneto-dielectric hyperbolic toroidal system. The Egyptians used to say that all is atum, A-T-U-M. Atum indicated the all and everything in our realm connected, and we argue that atum is the true model because we live in a toroidal tomb. So atum is an anagram of atom, A-T-O-M-B, which is also an anagram of the famous name Adam, A-D-A-M, like Adam Kadmon, which is also an atom, A-T-O-M. So scientifically speaking, the atom, as we all know, is defined as all that is indivisible, meaning the single most deductible unit. So atom means the one, aka the monad. And ironically, by the way, monad is also an anagram for the name Adam, which is atom, which is atum. Now, we all know that language encodes reality in the sense that language is like ritualistic linguistic alchemy. So knowing the esoteric nature of language is comprehending that spelling, words, and letters are all interchangeable. So words can be seen as fluid expressions of one unified monadic logos, or the divine word, or the word of God. So language, in its most primordial expression, was never simply just a tool for communication. It was a metaphysical lattice, an encoded matrix of vibrational correspondence, sacred geometry, and cosmic intelligence. So in the ancient world, the invention of letters was a revelation, a hieroglyphic descent from the higher divine into the lower material symbolic. So letters were actually regarded as capturing living archetypes, each carrying phonetic value and ontological force. So the ancients believed that the vibratory signature of a letter could be transposed, mirrored, recombined, or transcended to access higher and deeper layers of intention and meaning. And this gave rise to the art of what is called anagrammatology, the rearrangement of letters to unveil something intentionally hidden. Anagrammatology is the focus on anagrams, employing a word, phrase, or a name by forming or rearranging the letters of another second word so that the two separate words connect as an anagram. It's like a hidden layer to structuring language or words. So essentially, a single word can possess a multiplicative double entendre, showcasing either the monad, the one, or the dyad, which is the two, better known as the demiurgos. The demiurgos is the god of two, who in terms of energy reveals himself as the god of redshift and blueshift. Red and blue are the two opposing vertical polarities of the atom in the toroidal description. So every atom contains a red polarity and a blue polarity, with the white light spectrum emerging from the primordial black light, a double multiplicative entendre. So based off of the work of Ken Wheeler, he explains that all phenomena in nature may ultimately be described as dynamic interactions between the foundational properties of dielectric permittivity, capacitance, resistance, and magnetic permeability. These four field characteristics define the behavior and structure of energy, motion, and form across all scales, from microscopic interactions to macrocosmic systems. And so we observe this process in nature where unity divides in order to express itself. Points of energy, called atoms, notice the anatomy of the human body is anatomy, and we also have a torso, which is an anagram of torus, referencing the torus field that emanates from the center of the atom and from the center of our hearts. So torus is torso, and anatomy is a body composed of atoms. So when you recognize that the true model of the universe is the torus field, which in itself is an atom, you understand that through this energy field, expressing itself in a time continuum-like manner, that all things are engaged in this very same process, and that everything in our reality is a torus field, essentially. This is the fundamental process that is occurring across the entire Earth at all times, in every moment, in everything. As Ken Wheeler explains, the magneto-atomic model, or the toroidal model of the atom, in essence, is an electromagnetic field that is oscillating at trillions of cycles per second, thereby generating the perceptual illusion of solidity. The perception that everything is solid material is an illusion. So likewise, the Earth itself functions analogously to an atom, a torus field, a massive, huge torus field that is possessing its own electromagnetic field, oscillating at a specific frequency, enveloped by the broader frequency cycles of the luminary bodies over the course of their celestial cycles. So all that is perceived as physical is, in fact, an inversion of counterspace. We're going to get into counterspace a little bit later. So all matter, basically everything that seems to be solid, is actually sustained by hidden perpetual motions. Atoms undergo continuous cycles of polarization and depolarization, and may be best understood as oscillating perturbations, pulsating between defined polarity points. That actually the idea where two poles come from. However, this oscillation between poles is not a binary or a static bipolar condition, but rather it is a dynamic inversion of counterspace. And this ongoing process of polarization and depolarization is inherently reciprocating and precessional, taking the form of a hyperboloid structure, simultaneously repelling and attracting through both polar extreme points. So it is from this configuration that the concept of the toroidal hyperbola emerges. The energy within the atom both reciprocates and oscillates simultaneously due to its intrinsic polarizing nature, manifesting into what modern science likes to call a north and a south pole. But yet there really is no such thing as a north pole and a south pole. This entire energetic dynamic is, at its core, an inverse expression of counterspace. So in rethinking the architecture of Earth's electromagnetic system, the toroidal model offers a paradigm shift from the globe-based geomagnetic deceptions. The Earth is a living, conscious, multidimensional being. You have to be able to perceive the Earth as flat, round, and hollow with dimensions contained within it at all times together at once, existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The plane that we live on is flat, a flat dielectric inertial plane. The structure it resides in is spherical and hollow in nature, while the universe that it sits in is concave and expanding, all of the models combined in one. And the higher that your personal frequency is, and the higher that you activate your multidimensional self or your upper stranded DNA, the more you will see the true form of Mother Earth or Mother Gaia, a living Merkaba, a living, breathing, pulsing, sacred, geometric, morphogenetic, hologrammatic matrix womb that reflects and mirrors your consciousness level. Perception creates our reality. So we have the waters above and the waters below, partitioned by the firmament. And this firmament or dome is composed of paramagnetic liquid oxygen and antiferromagnetic solid oxygen simultaneously, forming a stratified crystalline barrier within the etheric architecture of the heavens. So rather than conceiving Earth's magnetic field as a simple dipole arcing symmetrically from one north pole to one south pole, from one polar extremity to the other, the toroidal model introduces a toroidal circulation of dielectric and magnetic dynamics, characterized by two high-pressure vortical zones and two low-pressure field inversions. These are not arbitrary. They correspond precisely with the polar vortices and the tropical boundary thresholds, namely the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, forming a closed-loop energetic system that is grounded in pressure gradients and torsional geometry. So in this model, the so-called magnetic poles are not singular axial endpoints at the north and the south part of the round globe or whatever, but rather they are mirrored vertical nexus points embedded within the greater toroidal shell. The North Polar Center, located at the geographic Arctic, acts as a central dielectric vortex, the origin point from which energy radiates outward and downward through field curvature. So this radiative flow reaches the Tropic of Cancer, where it inverts and penetrates the Earth, descends through the Earth via subterranean channels, and reemerges in Antarctica, redefined as the southern North Pole. There, the current again expands out again toward the Tropic of Capricorn, where it once more enters the Earth and continues its journey back toward the original Arctic center. And this doesn't describe a bipolar dipole arc, but a reciprocating quadrupolar toroidal loop that is self-sustaining, centripetally and centrifugally balanced, and anchored by 4 distinct polar positions. You have the northern North Pole, which is the Arctic vortex, the center emergence point. You have the northern South Pole, the Tropic of Cancer, which is a field inversion boundary. You have the southern North Pole, which is in Antarctica, the Antarctic Circle. It's a reemergent vortex point. And then you have the southern South Pole, the Tropic of Capricorn, which is the final inversion boundary point. So each of these axial designations corresponds to field inversion zones, where dielectric implosion becomes magnetic explosion, and vice versa. It's happening simultaneously back and forth at all times. The toroidal system, therefore, is a field engine, a dielectric magnetic dynamo that is maintained through the dynamic interaction of 2 converging modalities: the inward moving centripetal converging dielectric field that is redshifted, right turning, and implosive, and the outward radiating centrifugal diverging magnetic field that is blue shifted, left turning, and explosive. These are just polar opposites. These conjugate flows form the very basis of toroidal geometry, where the hyperbolic dielectric axis compresses into the plane of inertia and the toroidal magnetic arms expand outward in coherent vortex loops. So in this model, the central dielectric axis represents counterspace, a non-Cartesian, non-extended region of pure potential where the black sun energy is neither spatial nor temporal, but rather defined by radial acceleration towards rest. It is from this axial null point that the magnetic field is born, not as an independent substance, but as an effect of dielectric perturbation. Magnetism, in this view, is not a standalone force, but the spatial footprint of dielectric loss, an outward radiation that curves due to pressure gradients and field tension, forming the toroidal shell around the central hyperbolic core. The ether must be constituted as a plenum, which places it in a class of its own. So light is therefore an influence propagated as wave motion, and moreover, by transverse undulations, for the reason explaining that the ether is a medium which possesses a type of divine elasticity that is similar to a rigidity, and it must be very different from any ordinary matter that we know. So everything that we see, that we measure, and that we experience within the bounds of three-dimensional space arises from that which is fundamentally unseen. The invisible source is not abstract. It is the substrate of all appearance, the ground of being from which all manifested phenomena emerges from. It is neither spatial nor temporal in nature, once again, but rather the condition from which space and time are projected. In the language of field theory and dielectric ontology, this unseen realm is known as counterspace. whereas conventional three-dimensional space is defined by linear motion and chronological succession, where we use clocks and time to navigate through life within the coordinates of measured time, as we all know. However, counterspace is the inverse opposite, dimensionless, timeless, and at rest. It does not contain things, but rather it is the metaphysical prior to all of containment. Some may refer to it as the supernatural, the transcendental, or the metaphysical, but within the precise language of torsional electromagnetism, counterspace is the locus of radial dielectric acceleration, the wellspring from which both space and magnetism emerges through and emerges from. So in this view, manifested space is not a primary reality, but it's an after effect, a kind of luminous echo of a deeper unseen equilibrium that comes from counterspace. So the toroidal field, which defines the structure of atoms, stars, and the Earth's own energetic system, is generated by this polarity between counterspace and what we call three-dimensional space, the space that we're living in right now, between dielectric implosion and magnetic explosion. Now, the central axis of the torus and the inertial plane marks the site of maximum potential and minimum kinetic movement. It is from this axis that all divergence radiates outward and toward which all convergence returns to. So therefore, what we call the visible world, matter, light, and magnetism in motion, is not self-originating. It is an effect of unseen causal principles, structured by field gradients and sustained by the reciprocating tension between counterspace and the extended space, the three-dimensional space. The tropics, the Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn, and the polar vortices within Earth's toroidal magneto-dielectric system, the fourfold polar model, and even the perceived flow of time are all modalities of differentiations that are born from the disturbance of this primal rest, this counterspace, this unseen space. This is the essence of a unified field epistemology, one that recognizes that all that is arises from what is not, and that the true structure of reality is not mechanical, but field conjugate, recursive, and anchored in the dielectric stillness of counterspace. Furthermore, this model reveals that gravity, as traditionally defined, is fundamentally misunderstood. Gravity is not a separate field modality, but a non-discharging dielectric centripetal acceleration, an inward-directed rarefaction, or a mutual mass acceleration towards counterspace. As Ken Wheeler explains, gravity is not a force acting between masses, but it's the localized expression of dielectric convergence that is shaped by the same torsional dynamics that define magnetic discharge. So therefore, what we call gravity is a subvariant of dielectric behavior that is rooted in implosive coherence rather than external attraction. Okay, so what that means is that we can't just say that gravity doesn't exist, but the gravitational effect of counterspace does exist in this toroidal model. The Earth's auroral phenomena, like the aurora borealis in the north and the aurora australis in the south, are natural manifestations of this framework. These luminous emissions occur precisely where the magnetic divergence meets atmospheric capacitance at the tropic polar boundaries, acting as visible signatures of field recombination zones where dielectric gradients cross their inertial thresholds. So crucially, the toroidal nature of this system is not unique to Earth. It is echoed in the very structure of the atom, which likewise operates as a magneto-dielectric dynamo, centered by a hyperbolic inertial core and bounded by toroidal magnetic rotation. This same structure is seen in hearts, accretion disks, hurricanes, spiral galaxies, and even subatomic particles, all exhibiting a recursive symmetry of implosive intake and explosive release, modulated by counterspace geometry, toroidal geometry. So in totality, this toroidal geocentric model offers not merely a cosmographic correction, but a unified field epistemology, one in which magnetism, light, mass, and space are not isolated phenomena, but model expressions of a singular, coherent dielectric field. The atom, the earth, and the cosmos at large are not built from particles or inert mass, but from pressure gradients, field lines, and torsional geometries that are governed by the breathing equilibrium of implosion and explosion, convergence and divergence, blue shift and red shift, good and bad, hot and cold. It is a model in which space and time dissolve into field dynamics, and the universe is revealed not as a machine, but as a living, recursive vortex, self-generating, self-sustaining, and unified at every scale by the geometry of the torus and the axis of the hyperbola. The fundamental architecture of atomic and field structure is most accurately described through the conjugate geometries of the torus and the hyperbola. The looping donut-shaped toroidal form is the expression of magnetic divergence, representing the outward centrifugal rotation of energy through space. It manifests the expansive, left-turning, blue-shifted aspect of the field, forming the surrounding magnetic vortex. And in contrast to that, the hourglass-shaped tapering inward hyperboloid is the expression of the dielectric convergence, marking the centripetal inward implosion of energy into the axis of inertia. There is the right-turning, red-shifted path of returning potential, which is a suctional flow towards stillness. And these two forms are not separate, but they are interdependent. The hyperbolic axis forms the central spine of the toroidal field, housing the plane of inertia, the neutral non-spatial center through which all energy vectors both converge and diverge. And this center is not a point in space, but a condition of counterspace, where the dielectric field reaches its apex and the magnetic field is nullified. And together, the torus and the hyperbola describe a self-regenerating atomic engine, a living engine, wherein energy moves continuously between implosive inward acceleration and explosive outward radiation. From this central axis, the energy bifurcates and extends vertically, often visualized as a luminous branch or field line that is radiating outward and then returns inward in a mirrored symmetry. This establishes a dual polarity, not in opposition, but in conjugate harmony, feeding the structure as a whole through recursive flow. It is within this framework that we must distinguish gravity from gravitation, like I said. So it's not that gravity doesn't exist, it's that dielectric gravitation is an onset or a subset of the nature of counterspace. Conventional physics describes gravity as the acceleration of mass towards mass, but yet within the toroidal dielectric model, this is redefined. Gravitation is the converging behavior of the dielectric field, an inherent tendency of energy to collapse toward the plane of inertia. So as explained by Ken Wheeler, what we call gravity is not a force of attraction, but a mutual acceleration towards that counterspace, a non-discharging dielectric torsion spiraling inward with centripetal pressure. It is not an independent field or force, but it's an expression. It's a subset of the dielectric principle that is arising from the same ethereal tension that governs capacitance, charge, distribution, and the internal cohesion of field structures. Therefore, gravity is not an external force acting upon mass, but it's the manifestation of dielectric implosion within a toroidal field geometry. It represents a kind of rarefied tension in the ether, converging all mass toward the same point of energetic equilibrium, the plane of inertia at the heart of every magneto-dielectric system. So, to reiterate, dielectric gravitation refers to a centripetal non-radiative modality of the dielectric field, characterized by the mutual acceleration of mass towards counterspace, that center portion of the toroidal field. So in this framework, gravity is not an independent field or force, once again, but rather gravitation is a subvariant, a secondary effect of dielectric collapse, conversion, or implosion. The dielectric itself is a releasing discharge directed towards counterspace. Spatial energy discharges, such as lightning or electrostatics, are outward expressions of this implosive behavior. A discharge of capacitance results in increased inertia, while the loss of inertia gives rise to magnetism, its centrifugal counterpart. So what is commonly referred to as gravity is more accurately understood as a form of dielectric convergence, a non-discharging centripetal torsion or toroidal rarefaction, experienced as downward acceleration. Unlike the Newtonian or the Einsteinian interpretations, which says gravity as either an attractive force or curvature of space-time, dielectric gravitation positions it as a coherent field effect of the ether, a symptom of torsional pressure mediation within the dielectric continuum. So it is seen implosive tendency of mass energy to return to a state of pure potential, governed by the external motion, but by the self-restorative equilibrium of the dielectric medium itself. So within every toroidal model of the atom, there exists a plane of inertia, a neutral counterspatial disk separating the two polar extremity points, what is typically labeled as north and south in magnetism, and they are merely opposite polarities of this toroidal equilibrium. The internal dynamics of the atom are governed by magnetodielectricity, a unified field that is comprising of magnetism, which is radiative, repulsive, centrifugal divergence, and dielectricity, which is contractive, attractive, centripetal convergence. So these two forces, these two important essential forces, operate in tandem together. Magnetism expresses outward, left-turning, blue-shifted centrifugal divergence from the center. Notice its classification as radiation. It radiates out and diverges centrifugally outward, while dielectricity as an inward-moving, red-shifted, right-turning centripetal convergence constitutes the essence of gravitation. The energy is gravitating back inward. However, once again, there is no gravity. Electricity, then, is not a separate force, but a resulted hybrid product of these two principles, carried within and mediated by the magnetic field. All magnets possess an electromagnetic field because the dielectric and the magnetic components are not isolated, but rather they are interwoven in a coherent, self-sustaining structure. And in such a system, magnetic energy radiates from the polarity extremity points, while dielectric gravitation pulls inward toward both polar points and the inertial plane, creating the dynamic field interactions that are observed in attraction and repulsion.